Yeah. So I think if somebody is sitting on a fence, then I'll tell them please sit on a picket fence. So it's very painful to sit on a picket fence, and that's going to make you decide to jump either ways. Either you jump to another job because you're not happy with where you are, or you jump this side and take the plunge. But either ways, do something about it.
I think first and foremost, never hold an idea back. Never. Just give it a chance. That's how I see it. I'm a big opportunist. And I will never hold back an idea. I will allow it to come to table. I will allow it to form some shape and idea. And uh, if it's between the husband and wife, I think it's not always that we have to prove to each other whether this will work or not.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our podcast series, the Second Innings Podcast. I'm Atul Nath, and with me is Suman Ghosh, and we are your hosts for this podcast. Purpose, passion, joy are becoming more and more important to all of us in our journeys, especially in our work. Many of us are trying to find these things through rediscovering ourselves by changing tracks in our lives to a second innings, especially in our work. The Second Innings Podcast that we do is where we explore through conversations with some people who have made this kind of a transition. We uncover their stories, experiences, and of course, their learnings. Transitioning to a second innings may require actually taking some risks and stepping outside of societal norms as well as your comfort zone. Telling and listening to such stories helps all of us grow. Today, we have a couple of great guests with us for this episode, and they are literally a couple. They are the co-founders of Doyen Foods as husband and wife. The first I'd like to introduce is Harish Bathija. Harish is a first generation entrepreneur. He has had over 20 years of corporate experience across multiple industries before he decided to co-found Doyen Foods. He's an MBA from the SP Jain Institute of Management and Research in Mumbai and a BCom from Madras University. Over the years, he's held several senior management roles in product development and marketing at companies like Arvind Mills, Associated Breweries, Zip Telecom, and Tata Teleservices before he was with Reliance Technology Ventures, and then finally took on the role as MD and CEO of Suvidha InfoServe. One day, he hopes to win an award for binge watching travel and food shows. With him, we have with us Kiran Dhameja, who is the other founder of Doyen Foods. Kiran is a graduate of Sydenham College of Commerce and Economics, again from Mumbai, and from Xavier's Institute of Communications. She has worked with some of the noted advertising agencies in India like Dattaram Concept Communications, SSCNB Lintas, Mudra, Vyas Gianetti Creative, DDB India, and Denso Marcom, contributing to building some major brands, including Diageo, McDonald's, the Aditya Birla Group, J&J Neutrogena, Clean and Clear, Lavazza, Raymond's, FedEx, etc., etc., etc. Before co-founding Doyen Foods, Kiran founded and ran a successful boutique advertising firm for over 10 years. That was the beginning of her second innings. Kiran has a deeply artistic and creative side to her too. What I'm going to do straight away is, first of all, welcome Kiran and Harish. Thank you so much for taking out the time to be with us and for this conversation. Harish, I'll start with you. Please do start by talking to us a little bit about your origin years. Talking about your siblings, your upbringing, your growing up years, your parents, and things like that.
Sure. So, hi Atul, hi Suman. Thanks for having us on this great show. I do have the opportunity of watching some of the other shows that you have done, and I think something great, that you guys are really creating. Just to keep this very crisp, I'll kind of give you a flavor of my background, and I'll slot it in three different, phases. So phase one is what I would call the Chennai phase, and that's more about my growing up years. Phase two is the transition from becoming a Chennaiite to a Mumbaiite, and the phase two is all about my corporate life. And phase three is about where we are today, which is the second innings and taking the plunge. So phase three, right? So my upbringing has been predominantly in south of India. I come from a Sindhi family, as most of you all would know, that we Sindhis came from Pakistan post the partition. So my grandparents actually moved in from Sindh came to Bombay and then settled down in Salem, which is further down south. And then eventually we moved to Chennai. My family has been traditionally in the finance or the money lending, what we call kind of business. And so my dad was a financier. I did most of my early years in schooling in Salem, and then we moved to Chennai. That's where I did the later half of my schooling, and then did my graduation, as Atul said, from Madras University. Our childhood and our upbringing, I would say that our family is not the conservative type. And one of the important things in our upbringing is we all had the independence and the freedom to do whatever we wanted to do, right? And whatever decisions we took in terms of which path we wanted to follow, which courses we wanted to do, it was totally our own decisions, right? And that's what I kind of cherish from my growing up days, that we had the freedom to do whatever we wanted to do. So when I kind of look back even now, uh, the whole concept of becoming an entrepreneur is about liberating your own self, right? And enjoying the freedom that you have to do what you want to do. So if I have to relate it back, I think it kind of starts from the years that I actually grew up, and that's where you actually value the freedom that you could go out and do whatever you wanted to do. School was for me a mix of academics and also a lot of kind of extracurricular activities. I was not the typical sports person, so I spent a lot of time in non-sports kind of activities. College was typically in a very conservative neighborhood of Chennai called Mylapore, where you had the most brilliant TAM brands coming in and taking admission in that college. And most of them were brilliant CAs who passed out from that college. So I was kind of exposed to some of the brilliant minds out there, and also given the kind of the conservative culture, so it was a kind of a balance between education plus also being exposed to the kind of conservative culture which typically is there in Chennai. I did a lot of extracurricular activities in college, and one of my, a lot of my time went into an organization called ISEC, which is an international student organization, and that was my early exposure into working in teams, working on projects, leadership, etc. Right, and that kind of set the foundation in terms of that I was very clear that I wanted to get into a corporate life, and I was always kind of fascinated with marketing and brands, and so when I did my MBA, that was my specialization. Uh, as Atul said, my phase two was more about coming to Bombay and doing my MBA at SPJN, and I worked across several organizations for about 20 years. The last stint was as an MD and CEO of an internet company, and prior to that, I was about 5 years in a venture capital. So my calling in terms of doing something on my own, being exposed to startups, actually started with that stint that I did for 5 years at Reliance Ventures, and that's where I think the foundation of going out and doing something of your own really started setting in, right? And then subsequently in
Sure, sure.
2015 is when we decided to take the plunge and we started Doyen Foods. So that's kind of been the journey so far.
Yeah, we'll talk a lot about that because I think that transition period from and when we spoke earlier, you told us about how your mindset shift happened when you were at Suvidha, and that really was the the grounding. And before that, in Reliance Ventures, when you kind of understood what entrepreneurship was all about. Um, Let me get across to Kiran. Kiran, over to you. Please tell us a little about your where you're coming from in life and the origin years and where you grew up and so on.
Thank you, Atul, and thank you, Suman, for getting us on this show. Um, so again, I have also come from a Sindhi background, and my family is predominantly been family of leaders. So my grandfather, my father, and now my brother, and of course me, we have all been achievers in some way or the other in terms of our curriculars, strong leadership, determination. We're very strong, strong personalities. In fact, the whole household, I would say, we are very strong personalities at home, including my mother. So dad has always been in business. I have always looked at him as a mentor, and I've always been very influenced with the way he went about with his work. Very hardworking, very determined, creative, definitely creative, very strong-willed, and he has made life from like nothing to something, and that was my starting point. To see when dad has been at a very humble stage of life to grow up into a very fine businessman and having such popularity, having such fame, having such strong determination of doing things. That kind of caught my attention at a very young age, and I was very proud of my dad. My mom is a homemaker. However, she came with a very strong background as well. Very well read, extremely talented, hobbyist in a big way. She held even a lot of awards for sports in her college days, in her school days, and she's always been an energetic person, very talented. So I think what really contributes to me is a mix of both these two, individuals, very, very strong personalities, which we have had when I was a kid, nurturing my entire growth stage in the earlier in my earlier life. And Basically, as a kid, I was put through a whole lot of things like creativity, sports and talent. At school, I used to love winning awards. I used to just love winning awards. Every week, I would carry an award back home for something on art, on craft, or things like that. Again, if I was going for an inter-school competition, I had to come back home with something. I had to get my name announced everywhere, and that's something which again used to work very strongly with me. The fact that I want to ensure that I will win, and I will work hard to make sure that I win. So all my school, all my college days, it was all about achieving, achieving, achieving. And when I went to from college, when I finished college and I was moving into my career, the very same day the college was ending, I knew what I wanted to do. I've always been someone who knows what I want, and what I will be doing will be something which is predetermined by me. I mean, I will work towards it to make sure that I kind of get there. So that was really my starting point in my life.
Super. So maybe that's a good time to start of talking about the transition, right? So you said you're an achiever, and that's clearly been evidenced, in your starting with your corporate life. You held some very good positions, and then Doyen is your not really your first venture. It's your kind of second venture because you already ran your own firm for almost 10 years before you started Doyen. So tell us a bit about the transition as to when you actually had to leave the corporate job and start out something on your own. What were the triggers? What were the challenges? What was going through you when you actually decided to take the plunge?
So I've had different situations that I've gone through before I really got out of Dentsu and moved into starting my own advertising firm. So while I was at Concept Communications years back, that was in like 93, two friends of mine from college and me, we teamed up together to actually do a freelance while we were at jobs. And that freelance used to happen at night. As in, we had a client, we would meet up at night. One would write the copy, I would do the art, and another friend of mine would do the strategy, and we would team up together. And there was a joy of getting, paid for something at that very initial stages of life where I was actually taking a paycheck of about 750 rupees. But the freelance fetched me 80,000 rupees. And that was a very high point in my life already. That was a very high point in my life. Because the whole thing of being able to work with nothing much in hand, with absolutely no experience in that sense, just being a very basic person coming into advertising, and you were able to sell an idea, to design an idea, and to be able to have a client in hand was a very big win. for all three of us, all my three friends, I mean, the two friends and me, it was a great high for us. So that was my one trigger in the very initial years. Having worked till the years of Dentsu, I left Dentsu with an itch. I mean, I was like done. 15 years in corporate life. I had gone through the entire rigmarole of, late nights, early mornings, presentations, working with creative tantrums. Everything was too much and more. But when I went to Dentsu, there was already a thing that should I be really getting into Dentsu or should I be getting out of Dentsu? And prior to Dentsu, I was at DDB India where I was already heading the business. I had done it and it was been all done, all everything. So I said, like, let me kind of really think whether I really need to hang on in a corporate life any more than this. Or should I be just kind of getting out and doing things on my own? One of the biggest things the reason why I wanted to move out was there was no discipline in advertising. I mean, the creative guy came in at whatever time he wants. The design would be done at a certain time. The strategy would happen at a certain time. As a person who was in strategy and servicing and all, we had no life because we were very dependent on the creative product, which is basically the creative person. If he came on time, we got the things on time, we are done. If you're not done, you're like, you're wasting hours and hours and hours. And that was something which was like kind of not really going well with me because I had sacrificed a lot of my time, my family. Harish and I were married. I was never getting home on time. I was never being able to, so there was a lot of guilt pangs in me that, am I really doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And that's when I decided that I have to kind of move out of Dentsu and now start my own. However, when I even the thought was there to move out, one day I just kind of resigned and I said, okay, I'm getting out. I went and I met a friend suddenly on the way, and my friend told me, listen, I've just started an advertising agency. Why don't you hop in and let's do something together? I said, all right. So I kind of was on a 1 or 2 month sabbatical at that time. We started doing something together, but at some point, my friend had given me a promise that, I will be actually getting you into a partnership, and that did not happen. I worked for 5 months and there was nothing that was coming through. Maybe he was just taking it for granted or whatever the relationship at that time was. But it was the time when I said, well, if I can earn so much for him, I can definitely earn for myself. And I don't need to be working together. So, I just said, all right, don't pay me, don't do anything. It's great we are friends, and I would not want to work anymore. I don't want to create any issues with each other, but I need to move on now. The very next day, I set up my agency. The very next day, literally the next day. I went hunting the same day. I went hunting for a place. I got a place. I put it up, and boom, we were like all set. There were a lot of discussions with Harish and me that whether I should really plunge, not plunge. So he said, we'll figure it out. Don't worry. Just let's do it. If you feel so strongly about your intuition tells you that you can do it, let's go ahead. And I just set the place up. I started off at a very humble beginning. The first day I got in a strategy document to do for someone, my bills were paid, my rents were paid, and I was rolling. That was no looking back at all on that. So as a person, I'm a very intuitive person, and I have a very strong gut. If I decide I will want to do something, I'm very persevering. I will make sure it will happen.
Excellent. So I think what's coming out clearly is that you were a very strong-willed person right from the beginning, and that's what kind of helped you to make that transition. Super. Harish, do you want to talk a bit about the actual transition? And for you, it's interesting because you were still working, excuse me, while Kiran had her own thing going, right? And I think at only much later did you decide to kind of join hands and start Doyen. So what's been the
Yeah.
experience of actually making the transition been for you?
Yeah. So I think the fact that Kiran had already started something, right? So I was actually when she started off, I was also starting off at Reliance Ventures, right? So for me, I was always fascinated with doing something from scratch. I love building things than getting involved in mundane routine kind of activities, right? So for me, Kiran starting off was also like as if it's a challenge for my own self, and I told her very clearly, don't focus on going after some of these big clients. There's a more bigger opportunity if you go after SMEs or go after startups because they are the ones who really need a hand holding in terms of building brands and marketing kind of support. While I was still working at Reliance Technology Ventures, but I used to actually, once I finished work, I used to come down to Kiran's office most often to pick her up. But I used to also hang around there, and we used to also discuss her line of business and what she's doing. And wherever I could pitch in, I'll try and kind of pitch in. So much so that I actually introduced her to some startups that we had actually funded, and helped her to actually go and pitch there and try and get some businesses, from there. So I was kind of working plus also trying to kind of support her from the back in her advertising, venture. So coming back to my transition to Doyen Foods, I was in a state where I had actually quit my the last stint, which was the company called Suvidha InfoServe, right? And I was in this phase as to what am I going to do next. And I was pretty clear that I'm not going back. I'm not going to go back to the regular corporate kind of job. Either I'm going to do something on my own, or I'm going to find somebody else who's trying to start up and probably join him or her and set an entire get into an entire startup kind of mode. So it was very clear that I wanted to do something on my own, and I'm not going to go into the corporate life. I was done with that entire trauma of going and applying for jobs and going for interviews. I said, I'm done with it. I'm not going to do it anymore. Right. So luckily, Kiran was already. We had a setup. We had our, this entire advertising firm that we had. So I was spending time with her, and one of the ideas was how do we scale this business up, right? So she was doing the traditional advertising kind of business, and we thought that why don't we bring in digital angle because that's the future of advertising, right? So I did a little bit of groundwork in terms of what should we do in terms of progressing to a digital kind of advertising environment. And about 4 5 months, I spent with her, and then this was somewhere in November of 2014. We were sitting and having lunch, and somebody had actually gifted us a box of dates, from the Middle East, and these were dates which typically you get
Yeah,
with different kinds of exotic, fillings in them. And so we liked the product. Yeah, so we liked the product, and we said,
yeah,
why isn't anyone doing this in India, right? It's such a great product. Dates are dry fruits, and dry fruits are healthy, right? And it's got a chocolate, so probably it'll also appeal to kids, right? So that was actually the trigger where.
okay.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to butt in here really quickly. Sorry, Harish.
Mm,
Before we get into that, into the story of Doyen, etc., I'm just going to pick up a thread that both of you were talking about, and in the spirit of looking back at your journeys and thinking of them in terms of joining the dots. Um, the way you were telling your story, Kiran, it's pretty clear to me, and maybe I'm looking at it from a perspective of second innings. So I'm seeing it like this. But entrepreneurship was in your blood from day one.
Yeah,
You discovered it over a period of time, doing that moonlighting project that you did, and then getting on to working with a friend of yours where the partnership did not work out, and then subsequently starting your own thing. Very clearly, entrepreneurship was in your blood. From day one, you were very clearly going to be an entrepreneur by hook or by crook, one way or the other. Now, that's looking back, do you see that journey as a logical step one, two, three, four, or do you see it as almost like a bumper cars kind of journey where you tried this and it kind of bumped into that and that bumped into that and then you landed where you have right now? So how do you kind of
right,
analyze that with the benefit of hindsight?
right. So I think from the day I got into advertising, so even getting into advertising was not something which was not designed by me. It was because like I said, that in my school and college, I was very much into co-curricular activities. I used to be doing a lot of painting. As a person, I basically do landscape painting. So art was an inborn thing with me. I just carried that forward, and I was myself into creative ideas. So you tell me to give you an idea on the spur of the moment, I can give you five ideas. That's what I'm all about, and it doesn't take me time. Uh, it was very clear that whatever I will be doing in advertising, it was with an aim to eventually head a business of my own. Because I had seen my dad,
Sure.
basically from my within myself, I am a person who is very creative at heart, at the soul, and anything that is something which is intriguing, which is, has curiosity value, which has creativity, involvement of an idea, generation of an idea, is something that triggers me, and I will leave everything aside and I will get on to it. So when I got into advertising, and I went to XIC also for the same thing, to learn advertising so that I could, streamline myself into learning the art and the craft properly. Um,
I'm just trying to get Harish's perspective on this. That Harish, what about from your point of view? Did you feel that you were always going to do this kind of an entrepreneurial journey, or do you see yourself as an, I mean, I'm sorry for using the term, but an accidental entrepreneur, or was it always your vision to be there?
No, so to be very frank, I think as I was working in the corporate life, it was always about, how do you climb the ladder up. It was never about coming out and starting something of my own. But within the corporate life, I was very clear that, and I was kind of fortunate with all the companies that I worked with. Whatever I did there was all about, either launching a new product or getting into a new venture within that corporate.
Mm.
So it was all about, doing something creative and where you're kind of involved in a startup kind of environment within the entire corporate, right? And that kind of excited me always. And when I look back, what was my state of mind when I shifted from one job to another? It was always that things that started getting routine out there, right? I shifted jobs when things were getting too mundane for me, and it was all about status quo. So I think that kind of environment is where I kind of thrive a lot. So yeah, right. I could probably say that I'm an accidental entrepreneur. But I think what really pushed me into getting into entrepreneurship and overcoming the fear was the kind of time I spent meeting so many entrepreneurs at Reliance Ventures. So the confidence came when I
Yeah,
actually met
yeah.
so many founders, heard their story, and when Kiran wanted to start her firm in 2007, that confidence came that yeah, you could really go out and do something on your own and not have the fear of failure. So in hindsight, if you ask me, joining the dots, I think that's kind of the framework that I would say.
Another important dot, sorry, Suman, I'm just going to close this piece here. Another important dot, Harish, is this interest in food and food shows and travel shows. Was that before Doyen Foods or after Doyen Foods?
It's absolutely before Doyen Foods, right? So
That means that that interest area in food shows and food was already a very fertile area for a food show
yeah.
to kind of come through there. What do you think about that
yeah,
as an
We went to Dubai for a Gulf food fair, and when we went there, there was a complete change in our thought process. We came back, the idea was completely fleshed out, numbers were on the table, and we were out.
so that Dubai visit. So I'm saying that going to Dubai and visiting that trade fair was a huge eye opener for me. Uh, it almost felt like this is my calling, right? And I felt like a
wow?
child in a candy land, and I said that look at these brands, look at the kind of foods, and I said this is what I really want to do. So I'm glad we actually went for that event. If we hadn't, then I think probably we would have still thought about whether we want to do it, not do it. So that event of going to Dubai. So if you talk about sitting on the fence, I think we took the plunge because after we went through that exhibition, we were very clear. This is what we want to do. This is the brand that we want to create.
One of the things, Harish, you mentioned when we were chatting earlier, and which caught my attention. You said at some point, I wanted to be a large fish in a small pond rather than the other way around, right? And I think that that's talking a bit about the mindset also, right? So it's very interesting that when you're narrating this, to me it seems that that mindset helped you to probably take the plunge. And not an accidental entrepreneur, but an accidental visit helped you quickly find your purpose. You just looked at it and said, "This is exactly what I want to do."
Yeah, yeah.
Makes sense?
Yeah, it
You
makes
know,
sense, and I think
Suman, we've talked about this. Suman, we've talked about this at in one of our earlier episodes as well. That luck is all about being prepared when an opportunity comes through, right? And
Yeah,
really, what's
yeah.
happened with Harish is that from his food passion and the opportunity. I mean, imagine you're eating a date and that becomes the beginning of a journey, right? That's because you were preparing for that at some level. Again, you can only see this looking back, but I think that's quite inspirational. Harish, you were saying something. I'm
I've
sorry.
I've heard of I've heard of couples. I've heard of couples, meeting for a date and a lot of things happening. But here is one couple who had a date, that to a chocolate coated one, and lot happened. So yeah, that's a very
Yep.
interesting story.
Yep. Um, one of the big considerations when you're doing a transition of this kind in your career, and most of the conversations we've had till now have been obviously with individuals and not a couple, as both of you are, is the whole financial piece. And I'm assuming in your case, it would be an even bigger challenge because we're talking about both the people in the home making a transition, even though Kiran, you'd already made the transition much earlier. But before you made the transition, Kiran, maybe you can talk to us about this first, actually. That did you do any kind of financial planning, or the fact that Harish had a stable corporate job helped you to take the leap and the plunge and say that, I'm taken care of financially, broadly speaking, the home is taken care of? Or did you do some Excel calculations or some kind of baseline calculations? Was there anything in that space?
Okay. So when I started off, Lobru, there was no numbers on the table. I mean, it was a complete open slate for me. I had to go pitch in the first client, and which was on the first day. I kind of got in a strategy document to kind of work on, and that started with my rents of the office, like I said earlier. That itself was sufficient, inspiration for me
Kiran,
to,
I'm just going to clarify here. I'm not talking about the finances of the new business. I'm talking about your personal
yeah, yeah,
finances by virtue of the fact that you would have no income.
yeah. So I'm coming to that.
Sure.
So I'm saying that because the paycheck took care of my rents, there was nothing to fall back on Harish on, whether he will fund the rent of the place, right? I mean, I became independent because I had already seeked a client. I immediately started getting, retainers. The business started getting retainership clients. When I was independent and I was able to manage the finances, the house was not something that would have suffered because we would have to make sacrifices, yes, for the kind of lifestyle we used to do. We used to go for travels and things like that. For an initial 1 or 2 years, we did have to, change from international holidays to domestic holidays. But it was all part of the, that entrepreneurial spirit that we were running.
Understood.
He
Yeah.
knew I had taken the
Understood.
plunge. He was okay with the plunge that I had taken, and he was very say some sacrifices on the way will happen. I mean, and basically we are both as a couple then getting into Doyen. There was many more such situations we went through. Obviously,
I'm sorry. I'm going to let me persevere along this line for a couple of minutes. Kiran, looking back, you've kind of gone along this journey from 2007 or 8 till now, 17 years, and God's been kind. You had a good run with Lobru, which was your agency. I just wanted to clarify for the listeners because they wouldn't know that. And then on to Doyen Foods, and the journey again has been good and great. It could very well have gone wrong as well. So yes, so that that's the area that a lot of people who are sitting on the fence, not really sure whether they want to do it. Looking back, things are good. You've enjoyed your journey apart from the financial piece, and you are mentally uh, have been prepared and continue to be okay with making the sacrifices in your life on a day-to-day basis to build your business, which is brilliant. All entrepreneurs do that. I've done it. I know someone has too. Um, I think I think what we are kind of trying to figure out here in this kind of discussion on the financial piece is that can someone do a pre-plan so that even if you are willing to make the sacrifices, how much sacrifice, right? So is it something you thought about that I'm going to have to make sure for the next 5 years I can't do something, or 10 years I can't do something, or was it that you just took it as it came to you?
I think it was more of take it as it comes to you because
Sure.
really, one didn't have like a line of clients to run after, and one didn't want to do that because I had made the thing very clear with myself that, we had burned the midnight oil in advertising already. I had done enough and more of late nights. I was not going to repeat the kind of rat race one went into at that time
Yeah.
as well. I
Yeah.
was very sure I will work 10 to 7 and I would have a life because in the advertising years, one didn't have that kind of a life. There was a lot more sacrifice that you were working late, you never came back home, you went for shoots, and it was bad eating habits, bad sleeping habits,
Yeah. Yeah.
no having anything.
Agency
So
life is very difficult that way. You're
very
absolutely right.
difficult.
Yeah.
So I was very clear that when I went into this phase of advertising, though it was my own agency, I would have a life. I would make sure that there was a lot more discipline. And that was one of the reasons also when I went out to do my own, I had a set of team who would deliver to me on a certain timeline. So everything was streamlined, including I started gymming. I mean, life was at its best. I had
Yeah.
more time with Harish. We started going for dinners. We started meeting, like, we would catch up on things so much more, which was never happening.
Harish, you're clearly, and in our multiple conversations, it's come through that you're clearly the numbers man, from a financial perspective, and your mind kind of works in that direction. So, can you give us a perspective not only of your own journey when Doyen Food started, but also your journey as a ringside view, watcher, audience member when Kiran was making, taking the plunge in her first venture? How did you see the financial planning perspective at that time?
So I did have an Excel sheet, right? So if that's what you're asking. So there was an Excel sheet, and I was, it had a cash flow. It had the next 5 years, how we, a typical venture capital kind of, mindset. When can we break in? How much of burn is going to happen? Blah 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 blah. All that. So now, if I look back, nothing worked in that plant, right? So I mean, it's been so fast paced from just thinking that we'll be in the dates business to today we are across so many categories, right? So nothing has gone as per plan is my basic, most profound statement that I would want to make, right? So you'll have to go with the flow. But if you're going the flow, always keep in mind where you want to put that hard stop in case something is not working out, right? So I was kind of clear
Yeah,
that we
exactly.
are going to put in only this amount of money, right? So if I'm going to say that I'm going to put in only 25, 30 lakhs, and after that 30 lakhs or 35 lakhs, if the business is not going to self generate, then I think we need to take a hard call, right? Either we pivot onto something else, or we go back to the drawing board and see what's working and what's not working. So there was a certain figure because we were bootstrapped. It wasn't that money was coming externally, and we had limited amount of budgets to work on. So it's kind of prudent that you have a figure
Burnt
in
all our
mind.
cash, what we have earned in the years.
No, I won't say we burnt all the cash. We kept some aside that will take care of emergencies, right? But having said that, I did have a figure in mind beyond which, if things were not working out, we would have actually gone back to the drawing board.
Right, right. But that's exactly, what I was trying to kind of come to in the thought process, that the fact that things don't go to plan is almost a given in any entrepreneurial journey, right? It's never going to go to the plan that you first kind of envisaged for what's going to happen, which is exactly why some form of a financial fencing, or as one of our earlier guests called, a firewall, a finance firewall, is a good idea to have in place, because that kind of allows for you to move better as you go along.
Both of you saying you need to enjoy what you're doing, right? And this has come out consistently with a lot of the people we've spoken. In fact, I get reminded of a quote somebody said, and I thought this was a nice definition. He said, when you're in the corporate life, you look forward to your Fridays, and when you're an entrepreneur, you look forward to your Mondays. And I thought that was very interesting.
Absolutely true.
Yeah,
Absolutely true.
yeah.
Very interestingly. Yeah, yeah. Like I have been just a dreamer. I've just been a dreamer.
So what would you, and I'm just picking up from this line you just said that you're a dreamer. What was and is your dream? How do you kind of connect that with a passion? Harish has mentioned already a couple of times to us about his passion for food, and a business in that space is something that is like a dream for him, and he felt like a kid in Candyland when you went first time to the Middle East, to that food fair, the Gulf Food Fair. And so how do have you? I mean, did you always have a passion, or did you discover it along the way? Have you discovered it yet?
So when I got into advertising, the whole thing of a brand, a brand, which used to shine in the marketplace, someone which is like known to everyone. Uh, Everybody buys into the brand. There is a brand promise. There is a deliverable from the brand. All these things used to trigger me to kind of, want to make a brand of my own sometime. I always said that, when I get to a certain level in advertising, I let myself 15 years in advertising primarily because I wanted to learn the entire journey of advertising. And I was very sure that when I get the day the itch comes to me that I need to leave, I should be fully set to be able to create a brand out there.
And when you say
And
create a brand, does that mean a B2C brand or a B2B brand would have been fine too?
well, I mean, there were no definitions at that time. It was a brand to be made because there was no online. There was of course B2B business, but the business structures were very different at that point of time.
No,
It was
the reason I asked that question, Kiran, was to connect it with the way you went about your transition journey, which is that, you created Lovebrew as a brand, which was very clearly a B2B brand, right? It was an agency brand. It's Lovebrew was never going to be a brand that millions of people knew about, right? That's not the
yeah.
nature of the agency business. Whereas, and that was one transition that you made. And so, for example, if you had continued to build Lovebrew as a brand and an agency over a period of 30, 40 years, it would still not be a well-known mass brand.
Yeah.
Whereas your current brand, Doyen Foods, is in the B2C space. So actually consumers know about the brand. So was this always part of the journey that you were going to build a B2C large mass brand, or would Lovebrew have been okay for that passion of yours?
So Lobro was a boutique design agency, and we were very clear that it would remain to be boutique. The only thing we would have done when Harish would have also probably come in with me, and which we were thinking in 2014 whether we should, come together and
Sure,
expand it, and it would become a digital agency as well. When I say that I wanted to make a brand, I'm talking about Doyen as a brand.
sure,
That
understood.
was my larger passion that I
Understood.
was driving.
Understood. That answers that thought process for me. That clearly a large consumer brand is what you kind of aspire to
Absolutely.
as a purpose and as a passion.
Yeah.
Again, just one thing that comes to my mind is okay, Harish is saying food has always been in his blood. That's what he wanted to do. Kiran, you're saying that I just wanted a bigger brand, right? So that is why probably you could move away from Lobro, which is your baby, right, into something which is totally different, which is Doyle. Uh, what happens going forward if you decide to do something even, which is even bigger, but nothing to do with foods? How does that work? Would that work for both of you? I'm just trying to see where the passion is really. Let's say tomorrow Harish comes with another idea, or maybe he wants to go back and do his cheese, right? To what you started off saying earlier, right? How open would you be to actually explore that? And I'm not when I say you, I don't mean only you, Kiran. That is a question to Harish as well, because I'm just trying to understand what is this, what serial entrepreneurs have in them for them to move from one thing to the other. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I'll take that question, right? So one thing that we will definitely do if we have to do something is that we will definitely create a brand. And at least for me, it has to be in the food business, right? So these two is very clear. I will not do anything now that I've already tasted blood. I will not do anything else apart from this, and I'm very clear. And somewhere down the line, I know I want to have my own flagship store and I want to have a cafe attached to it. So that's there into the future. I don't know when that's going to be achieved. And more importantly, both of us have a liking to the hills. So maybe at some point of time, 10 years down the line, we will connect those two together, right? And if you have a show called
Okay.
the third or fourth inning,
Yeah.
please call us.
One thing maybe we will quickly touch upon is being husband-wife team, right? If there is somebody watching who also wants to start out, as a couple, any advice for them? What are some of the do's and don'ts when you're actually, for instance, how do you keep the personal thing separate from work, right? So any thoughts around that?
You want to go first, Kiran?
I think first and foremost, never hold an idea back. Never. Just give it a chance. That's how I see it. I'm a big opportunist. I'm a big opportunist, and I will never hold back an idea. I will allow it to come to table. I will allow it to form some shape and idea. And uh, if it's between the husband and wife, I think it's not always that we have to prove to each other whether this will work or not.
So I think one of the important things that I would say is to kind of understand what each one's strengths and weaknesses are, right? And realize that and see how you can build upon it. Otherwise, I would say that you have somebody who can play an arbitrator role, get some third person in, who can then sit and kind of mentor each of you and then come to a common ground. So that's another way that you could probably, look at. But again, it's very individualistic. There's no
But
one answer kind of fits, for everybody.
Let me take you a few thoughts behind, Kiran, about, you both were talking about how you kind of make it work together in terms of no idea should be off the table and that everything should be discussed, etc. And a little while back, you talked about spices as an idea, and you talked about coffee as an idea, where, your intuition was strong and your gut feel was strong, etc. Let me ask you a controversial question. Has there been a intuitive idea or creative thought, or something that came from the gut which did not work? You've given us two ideas of things that worked, but ideas and intuition isn't always right. So has there been a situation where you went ahead and did something based on gut and intuition, but things didn't pan out the way that you hoped they would, and you had to kind of roll that back or stop doing it or whatever? Because
okay.
in that may lie the seeds of some amount of disagreement. Disagreement is the wrong word. Of having to figure things out in a situation where things were not going well.
Actually, with God's grace, we have not come to such a stage where we had to actually shelve an idea, thankfully. But there have been ideas where we have not been able to, bring it out only from the point that we are not yet ready to be able to bring in some ingredient, or we've not been able to put a whole story for the product yet. So they have been in the parking, and they've been incubated, and they've been put in the parking. And believe me, they will be out sometime. That's me. I'm going to make it happen. When we went into the business of olives, we do olives. I told him. He said, I mean, why do we need to do this category? It's no one's going to do this. I mean, between us, Harish has always been the guy who will question this and say, not sure, absolutely, maybe, God knows, let's see. I will always be the one who will pursue it, and I will come back with some thoughtful suggestions, and I will show him some concept. I'll have to actually prove it to him doing a concept in house. At my kitchen, I will do it, show it to him, and I say, see, have it. Now tell me. I will show it to a few family members, and when he sees family buying into that, is sometimes when he says, okay, forget the numbers. Let's just go and put it out. So the question is that if I've held back certain things, I'm not ready with the right ingredients for it as yet, and that's why the idea spark. There are many such products which we have kept them back. For
Yeah,
example,
I think
we are working on frozen foods, and we are working on breads, and we are working on many
Yeah.
other categories. We've just kept it in the parking. There are things happening.
No,
always.
I think I have my answer, which is that there are some ideas that come through and don't necessarily go forward in their full flow like the ideas that you have, because inevitably and you kind of parking lot them, and then maybe they'll see the light of day in the future at the right time.
You mentioned earlier, Kiran, that we are at loggerheads. I'm trying to figure out where are the other conflicts. I mean, that's the other thing with when co-founders work. There's a lot of conflict, right?
Yeah.
Can you give us examples where there's conflict? And I also want to understand from the lens of you know being a family, how do you resolve that? And the conflict could be in any area. It need not only be about an idea.
Yeah, sure.
Could be the color
I
of the
think it's
curtains, for
also
example.
definitely it's sometimes about how we should be running the business. Okay,
Okay.
how
Okay.
it should be, for example, what we should be charging for the products, maybe the pricing, or if it is about what comes free with it or what doesn't come free with it. So those are the other conflicts. It's not necessarily about the idea, it's about
So how do you
sometimes
resolve
the
those?
packaging. Well, we have to convince one or the other. It can't just happen we both have to come to the table eventually. If you go to see that, it cannot happen like just one of us can resolve it. We both have to come together because eventually we both have to see the plan through.
But what happens if one of you don't agree?
So I don't think, yeah.
No,
So
there is a reason I'm asking this
yeah.
because a lot of co-founders, they set some rules, and there's, like you said, one part is, you handle, the other part he handles. While it's great to build consensus, but sometimes when you're not able to build it, how do you proceed?
So I think the easiest thing to do is one needs to let go, right? If you're going to carry a
Okay.
grudge, and in our case, because we are a couple, we don't have the liberty to carry a grudge, right? So
Absolutely.
somebody has to let go,
Very good
right?
point.
And in the best interest of the company, it's
Hmm.
better to let go because we both come from this mindset of what next. So if you're going to hold back something, then you're not
Hmm.
going to move forward, right? So forget it, accept it, and
Hmm.
start moving
Hmm.
forward. So that's the kind of mindset that we both, come from. So more than often, I'm letting go, right? But we have had taken certain decisions. We went through, we learned, we burnt a hand, and that's part of the process, right? If we hadn't done it, then we wouldn't know what kind of mistakes that we made, right? And what can we learn from it, right? So it's important that you act, and only when you act can you grow and learn from it. If you don't act, then I think you're setting yourself back 2 or 3 steps. So better do something about it.
But
Don't.
Also, it could need not be only about the business you're running at that point in time. Even if everything is going fine, you know, two of you may disagree on the way forward, for instance. Somebody may want to grow at 5%, somebody wants to grow at 20%. I'm just giving an example, right? Somebody's interests may vary. So there are a lot of things that can even, so aligning on those also become important in the interest of the company looking forward.
Yeah, so that I think we have had several
yeah,
internal discussions and have about how do you scale this business up 2x, 3x time, right? So currently our products are pitched in the premium segment, right? And there's always this question:
Mhm.
if I had to drop my price, then can I open up a far larger market, right? So today we're catering to the fine dining, to the 5 stars. There are smaller standalone restaurants. So if I had to drop my price, would this kind of give me the volumes, right? Whereas Kiran comes from the fact that this brand is kind of pitched as a as a luxury or as a premium brand. The moment you try bringing in a mass kind of segment, then we're diluting that brand image that we're trying to create. So these are kind of interesting discussions that we kind of have. Uh, uh, Pertinent
Okay.
questions, but sometimes we don't arrive at a particular answer. So you then say, okay, let's park it and keep moving, right? Whatever we are doing, whatever is in hand, let's just focus on it, right? So yeah, I think there are conflicts.
So, it's interesting these topics that we were talking about, either looking forward or categories, all of that. Very tactical question. When do you discuss this? Do you discuss this at work during the day when you're working together? Do you bring it home and discussing it over evenings or over weekends?
So most of the practical discussion happens at work. Right? When we come home, it's more about something that needs to be addressed or some call that needs to be where we both need to get onto a call extra. Some of these strategic discussions are best done when you are at your workplace, right?
Okay.
And the fact that we are spending a lot of time during the day together, it's important that when we come back, then each one of us has our own, space, right? So we do it more during the daytime, and if at all we have to carry some work back, it's more about connecting with someone or sending some email that we missed out sending in, etc. So we keep those, the boring kind of jobs that we can do at home, but the more interesting kind of job thinking that we do it at office.
Absolutely, I'll agree with that because such discussions, I definitely don't want to do them at home. I think over the time, Harish has also been doing art of living and he does practice art of living. Very recently, I went for Vipassana and I am just loving it. I go for an evening walk in the evening after my dinner and make sure that I spend time just looking in the open into the expanse because that's where my dreaming starts again. If I'm going to start talking all this again at home, it's not going to be able to give me new ideas, new sparks. So I'm very clear that when I come home, I definitely don't want to discuss work related intense discussions like this. We want to be in our little spaces. We spend time together, but at the same time, he has his things to watch. We watch travel shows together. We watch a lot of influencers, bloggers doing food and things like that. That's the time where we kind of get together. We watch, we enjoy, we talk about travels. Um, we enjoy that space at home. We don't want to enjoy a discussion definitely at home on and something where we are going to be loggerheads probably.
Okay, and now I know how where Harish gets the time to binge watch all those shows as well. Super.
Yeah, fascinating how you've built this kind of, like an area for yourselves in terms of spaces for both of you together as well as individually. Okay,
Yes.
so my next area that I'd love to talk to you guys about is that, looking back, if you had to do this transition or this journey again, what are the kind of things you would do same, and what were the kind of things you would do differently? Harish, maybe you can share with us first.
So I think that's actually a little difficult question to answer in terms of what I would do differently, especially when now we're kind of content with how things have kind of shaped up, right? So we probably would have done the same thing. Maybe from my perspective, I would have taken a little bit more risk, right? Now that I see that things have kind of panned out, I feel that if we had slightly upped the game, we would have been a little bit more ahead of the curve in terms of time and where we are in terms of the portfolio, etc. So it's nice to see it in hindsight, but I think if there is a strong intuition, there's a strong gut, then I think try and up the game.
Fair enough. So one of the learnings is that if you were to do it differently, you'd take more risks.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any words of advice from each one of you? You've already given us actually a lot of thought process and advice in terms of working together. But, for people who are fence sitters who want to take the plunge, any words of advice that you'd like to share with them? Uh, Harish, with you first.
Yeah, if somebody wants an advice, I'm going to tell them go to Spotify. There's this brilliant program called Second Innings. You will get tons of advice out there, and that too free, right? So why do I need to reinvent the wheel, right? And I'm serious. I think you guys are doing it because it's going to add value to somebody like that, right?
That is true.
So yeah, so I think if somebody is sitting on a fence, then I'll tell them please sit on a picket fence. So it's very painful to sit on a picket fence, and that's going to make you decide to jump either ways. Either you jump to another job because you're not happy with where you are, or you jump this side and take the plunge. But either ways, do something about it, right? So
Absolutely.
that's my single piece of advice.
Very
And
actionable
I would
advice, I
say,
must say.
Very actionable, and
and
I think it
I
connects.
would say, someone who's wanting to do something, I think he needs to manifest it. He needs to dream it. He needs to ensure that, he's seeing the stars by the day and not by the night, because it's only when you do that and only when you get behind something, you will be able to make it happen. If you say that, I'll see later and, make excuses, you're never going to get there. There are many friends I know who keep telling me, how did you do it? And I want to do it also. I just say, just go and do it. Yeah. I mean, like, why the hell do you want to even, question it? If you have had an idea, please germinate it. That's all.
We
And
had a few episodes back, we had this very young lady who started a dance form school, and she told us that a lot of people tell her that, I also want to do it. I want to learn this dance form. She said, all I tell them is come for the first day of practice at 5 a.m. Tomorrow, and you can do it. And she said, till today, nobody's turned up because everybody wants to talk about doing it, but nobody wants to come at 5 a.m. in the morning to actually do it.
I must
Yeah.
tell you, for some time I wanted to go for Vipassana. Okay. I mean, there were these things that I used to tell everybody, I can't meditate. I'm a very restless person. I'm a very restless soul. I just can't sit in a place without, thinking, without doing something. I have to have a paper and a pen in my hand, to do doodling or whatever. I can't be sitting and doing meditation. It's not my cup of tea. But really, a friend of mine told me that, just go for a session. Just go for a session. Okay, don't say something like this that you can't do it. Trust me, the day I went for Vipassana, I have changed. I've totally changed. I mean, I came back absolutely exhilarated. I had a great experience because I've never sat 10 days without talking to people, without connecting with people, without socializing, with no work in your head. I've never had those 10 days. But those 10 days of my life, I will always remember because it gave me a complete change. It's a new perspective of life that I've seen. That actually, I had the most constructive 10 days that I went for Vipassana. I'm in fact going for a second run just after Diwali.
Wow.
And it's
There's one more
it's
thing
just
that I would
inspired me to
add.
kind of do this.
There's just one more thing that I would add, and this is from my own personal experience, is that there's nothing like a good plan and there's nothing like a bad plan. There's only good execution and there's bad execution, right? So don't spend too much time on the planning part. Focus on how we're going to execute it properly because that's where the success lies in. I think we spend too much time on plans and not focusing on the execution part of it. Everybody has a brilliant idea, but what makes or breaks is your execution. So focus on that.
And I will add to it that there's
Well said.
everybody's is very enthusiasm is very common. Enthusiasm is very common for people, but execution is very rare. I think they should be enduring, and that's what really makes the final journey come together. They
I
have to
think
endure a plan.
I think that's an amazing place for us to end. Some great thoughts, at least for me, to take away from this discussion, Suman.
Likewise, I think it was very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and and I love that picket fence thing, by the way. Yeah, I'm going to remember that. Yeah, it kind of at one level connects to this thing about not being in the moment, right? Because you're worried about the future or regretting the past, but you just have to go one way or the other, right? So that I thought that was interesting.
And that's made
Yeah, and that's
easier
one
when
of the
there's a pain in the
philosophies.
butt, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Exactly.
What you said, Suman, is one of the basic philosophies of the art of living, is that you have to be in your present
Mm.
moment, right? That is the moment that you own.
Yeah, yeah,
The past is all about regret and
yeah.
guilt, and the future is all about fear and anxiety. So the more you are in the present moment, the more
Mm.
you are in a more relaxed environment, the more energy, the more action that you can actually do.
Thank you so much for your time, Harish and Kiran. We really appreciate the time you've given us, the candor, the openness, the willingness to share, especially with both of you. This is this is as much a part of your personal lives as husband and wife, as well as co-founders of Doyen Foods. So Much more power to you. We wish you great success in all future endeavors, including the cheese business, including the painting in the hills, and everything else that you may dream of. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you. Thank
Suman.
you.
Thank you so much, Atul. It was very a pleasure being on the show.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank